Welcome back to Heavy Duty, the channel where history meets horsepower. Today, we're taking a trip back in time to one of the most fascinating automotive experiments ever attempted, the 1939 air-powered car. That's right, almost a century ago, engineers were already trying to move beyond gasoline. And while electric cars are making headlines today, back then, someone was crazy enough or brilliant enough to build a car that ran entirely on compressed air. And not just as a prototype, it actually moved. Let's take a look at what this forgotten machine was all about. When you first see the 1939 air-powered car, you're instantly transported to a time when cars were still sculpted like art. Its design is unmistakably pre-war, with that sweeping aerodynamic form that looks like it belongs in a wind tunnel or on the Bonneville salt flats. Long flowing fenders, a rounded front grille, and a low-slung profile gave this vehicle a futuristic look even by today's standards. It had the presence of an experimental aircraft and the soul of an inventor's daydream. You wouldn't guess just by looking at it that under the skin, it was powered by air, not gas. The bodywork was made of lightweight materials to compensate for the power limitations of compressed air. Steel and aluminum panels were hand-formed, designed to reduce drag as much as possible. The wheels were tall and narrow, built more for efficiency than grip, and the underbody was mostly enclosed, an aerodynamic trick that wouldn't become mainstream until decades later. Small vents and scoops were carefully placed to help cool key components, although the air motor didn't generate the kind of heat a combustion engine would. Inside the cabin, the 1939 air-powered car was just as forward-thinking as its powertrain. It had a simple, functional layout with a single large gauge cluster in the center of the dash. That gauge didn't show RPMs or fuel, it showed tank pressure. That was your fuel gauge. Everything else was stripped down to essentials. No frills, no fancy materials. It was all about weight savings and simplicity. The steering wheel was large and thin, typical of the era, and the seating was minimalist, more of a padded bench than contoured seats. Still, the cabin was enclosed, and it had a windscreen and a roof, making it a real car, not just a concept frame on wheels. Some prototypes even had basic ventilation and rudimentary lighting, though there was no heating system since the vehicle wasn't designed for long-distance use. It felt more like sitting in a powered soapbox racer or a land speed record car than a passenger vehicle. But it had doors, windows, and controls, and it moved under its own power. That's more than can be said for many experimental cars even today. Now the million-dollar question, how did it run? The air-powered car was driven by a custom-built motor that operated on compressed air stored in large tanks mounted either under the chassis or behind the seat. The engine was essentially a piston motor that used bursts of pressurized air to move the cylinders, similar to how a steam engine works, but without heat or combustion. The tanks were filled using an industrial air compressor, and once topped off, the car could travel roughly 30 to 60 miles, depending on speed and load. Top speed? Around 40 miles per hour, nothing compared to internal combustion engines of the time, but keep in mind, this was a car not burning a drop of gasoline. The acceleration was slow and steady, and the performance was incredibly quiet. No engine roar, no exhaust fumes, just the hiss of air and the whir of mechanical parts. It was eerily silent on the road, especially in an era when cars were known for rattling valves and growling tailpipes. In terms of price, it's difficult to put an exact figure on what the 1939 air-powered car would have cost back then. It was never mass-produced, so we're talking about a one-off or small-run prototype. But when adjusted for inflation, the development cost alone would have been in the tens of thousands of dollars by today's standards. Today, a restored or surviving example would be priceless to collectors and museums. Not just because of its rarity, but because it represents an idea that was way ahead of its time. This car wasn't built to beat muscle cars off the line or win any endurance races. It was an experiment, a bold statement that transportation didn't have to rely solely on gasoline. And it came at a time when the world was just beginning to industrialize transportation on a massive scale. While it didn't revolutionize the auto industry, it planted a seed. And that seed, decades later, has grown into modern air hybrid systems, regenerative braking, and alternative fuel experimentation. The 1939 air-powered car wasn't a success in the traditional sense, but it was proof that innovation doesn't always wait for permission. So there it is, the story of a car that dared to do things differently. a machine built not for profit or mass production, but for possibility. It's a reminder that the automotive world has always been driven by curiosity and courage just as much as horsepower and profit. And here on Heavy Duty, we salute the engineers, tinkerers, and wild thinkers who saw a different way forward long before the world was ready to listen. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this look back into automotive history, drop a like, subscribe to Heavy Duty, and let us know in the comments what rare machine we should cover next. Until then, keep your wheels turning and your ideas rolling.